Hey, everybody. Gillian, why don't you take it away?
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing today? I hope we're all good. It's super sunny outside. It's a beautiful day. And it looks like almost everything will be back to normal soon. So um, I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful to see all of your beautiful faces. And today we're going to have an amazing worship sesh with Ariana. Also, if you want to host a Facebook party or go watch us on YouTube Live, you can. That'll be great as well. And Ariana, take it away. We also have Daniel today having our message. So we're excited about that too.
All right, thanks, Gillian. Let's worship together, guys. Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide? Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you grace the other side. And oh, how long have I chased rivers from lowly seas to where they rise? Against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more nor less inclined. I wouldn't search and stop at nothing, but you're just not that hard to find. So I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you in the mountains and my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, oh, oh. Oh, how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend the path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sleep the sinners past. And oh, how fast will you come running, if just to shadow me through the night, to trace my steps through all my family and walk me out the other side. Who could dare ascend that mountain, that valleyed hill called Calvary? But for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. So I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you in the mountains and my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, 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 oh. shed. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, name you mountains. Wherever I stand, wherever I walk through, valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows. My song is from the greatest of all valleys. Come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upwards from a deep but empty grave. So I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you in the mountains. Lord, the shelter where my feet. So I will praise you in the valleys of the sea. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, the highlands and the heart of the sea. For your mercy never fails me, and all my days I've been held in your hand. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been good. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am in, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your voice, you have led me through the fire and in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend. I have lived the goodness of God. And all my life you have been great. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am in, I will sing of the goodness of God. Hey, your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running of the goodness. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna sing, 'cause your goodness is running out, it's running after me. 'Cause your goodness is running out, it's running after me. With my life laid down, surrendered now, I give you everything. 'Cause your goodness is running out, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am in, I will sing of the goodness. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good. You are good, you are good, good, oh, you are good, the King of my heart, be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. You are good, good. Oh, 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 you're never gonna let me down. 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 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, 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 you are good, good. Oh,
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ariana. We have something exciting today. I'm kind of pumped about it. Danny's going to bring us the word today from Daniel chapter 5. He said, when he heard we were doing Daniel, he said, I got to get in on this. So we're going to invite Danny to come in here and share with us. And he's going to have the screen sharing abilities. So he'll be presenting. And then after, we're going to sing another song. But thanks, Danny, for volunteering your time for this, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Can you see the presentation? Can everybody see the presentation on the screen there?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So, we're gonna be studying chapter 5 of the book of Daniel today. This chapter holds, or this book actually holds a special place in my heart personally because number one, my parents named me after the book, and number two, the first time my parents went on a couple dates, my father wasn't really from church. He wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist. He wasn't baptized, and my mother read him this book. This was one of the first books that she read to my father. And so when my father told me that, I said, wow, well, that's a great idea for a first date, right? Just reading the book of Daniel. And so it's just really exciting now that when the pastor told me, are you willing to present, today the book of chapter 5 of Daniel? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So just a little recap. As we've been going through the book of Daniel, last week we studied about King Nebuchadnezzar. There's numerous lessons to learn throughout this whole journey with Daniel. This particular chapter brings a very stunning and dramatic end. It's not kind of like Nebuchadnezzar, a little bit differently. And we're going to be studying about King Belshazzar, which King Belshazzar is actually the grandson of King Nebuchadnezzar. My title of the sermon is From Arrogance to Destruction. So if we can open our Bibles to Daniel chapter 5, verse 1, it states here, Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. Right now, King Belshazzar is living his best life, as we all know, right? Same way that King Nebuchadnezzar did, he's doing the same way. Apparently he felt recklessly secure in his capital. Babylon was very well protected by these strong walls. They had a system of canals that if any danger was to come at them, they can go under the canals to the water and be safe, and no invader can really reach the city in that case. So he's having a feast, as he says here. I got a picture up there of King Belshazzar. A lot of pride, a lot of arrogancy. There's a lot of attractions of wealth and power. A lot of beautiful women in the scene with their enchantments that were among the guests. Throughout shameless intoxication, Belshazzar was so drunk, and this is just a part of Kings and Prophets chapter 43. He was so drunk that he lost his mental capacity, and the king himself took the lead in a righteous orgy. So we can just picture exactly what kind of feast or banquet this is, right? We'll keep reading on verse 2. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem. The king and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So in this specific passage, there's a connection to chapter 1, verse 2. A couple red flags that we already see, right? Nebuchadnezzar seized the vessels from the Jerusalem temple, which was in chapter 1. He places them in the house of his God, right? Showing the least respect for the sacred status. But now Belshazzar turns the sacred vessels into drinking utensils, using it in the most profane way. Not only does Belshazzar use this during his feast, but now he's got an entire feast with everything, and he desecrates every part of God's vessels. And now what does desecrate, what does desecrate mean? It's kind of a powerful word there. And I was looking it up myself because I wanted to see what it was all about. And right here it says dishonor, abuse, violate God's holy property. And there was one part that was from prophets and kings that was a direct challenge to God's authority. I don't think I've ever seen somebody directly challenge God's authority, right? Something that Belshazzar did in this case. And not only that, they drank wine, praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, right? We'll keep moving forward now. Daniel 5:5. In the same hour, the fingers of the man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. The king saw that the part of the hand that wrote. Now, let's just put ourselves in an imagination here. I don't think any of us have seen an actual hand writing on the wall without a body, right? So this is a hand without any blood, just a random, pure human hand writing on it. I want to say that everybody in the feast had to be scared. I mean, completely. And now the same fingers that wrote the 10 commandments were not just the same ones writing about the commandments, but now it's using it towards to write about the life of Belshazzar. Instead of writing the laws of salvation, he wrote judgment against the actions of King Belshazzar. None of their gods, right, could ever do something like that. And so that's how powerful that it came into play. And as we continue in verse 6, then the king's countenance changed and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. I just put a couple memes here. We can take a look at how scared, it was just a few moments ago where it was all party and good, right? And now they went into pallid faces, cries of fear. They couldn't hide the intensity of their terror. The king actually was the most scared of them all. Prophets and Kings, again, chapter 43 states that the king was paralyzed with fear. Conscience was awakened in the joints of his loins, which is like the final bone of the spine, and the actual lower hip bones were loosened, which was the loins. So, AKA, the king had either one, peed on himself, or two, he dropped a deucer right on himself. That's how scared he was. So if we keep moving forward, this is a reminder of how we should manage some of the things that belong to God, right? Like the sacred vessels. Some of the things that we can bring a connection into our personal lives is one, resources. What do we have what do we call our resources, right? So I would say number one, we have our money. Some of the resources we have, a house, a roof over our head, a car to transport ourselves, clothes to dress ourselves. All of those resources that belong, that are ours, belong to God. God blessed us with those resources, right? Same thing with the bodies. Our bodies in the Bible, several passages state that we should treat our body like the holy temple. Are we eating healthy? What are we entering in the holy temple of ours, right? That belongs to God. Are we eating junk food? Are we drinking soda? Are we eating candies? What are we doing that is going to help our bodies to fulfill God's promise, right? And the last one is affection and love. Affection and love. Are we putting God in first place in our relationship, in our marriage? Are we giving God the first to take control, not to be selfish within ourselves? And I think this is a pretty good key point here, because a lot of the times in my own life previously, I would have relationships and I would never put God in first place. I would just, have a girlfriend and say, well, you know what? I have my relationship. But if there's no God in your relationship or your marriage, there is no foundation to your love, because God is love. And without God, there is no love. So we have to, this is just a personal connection here, that God claims authority over all these things: resources, bodies, and affection and love. As we keep moving forward, verse 7, the king cried out loud to bring the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now, does this remind you of somebody that we just recently went over, it's exactly like his grandfather, like father, like son. King Nebuchadnezzar, first thing he did was call out for his astrologers, his Chaldeans, his soothsayers. You know, sometimes we don't really see the greatest examples in our parents, in our grandparents. But I just want to make it be known that it's our decision to do the right things for God, right? In this case, Belshazzar followed the wrong footsteps from his grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar. We can also bring a connection back to Josiah in the Bible. So Josiah, his whole entire family was completely lost, completely went against God, didn't do, wasn't doing anything great for him. A lot of sinning, a lot of corruption. And we see a great example in Josiah that even though you're surrounded with that kind of influence, Josiah continued to stay firm with God, continue to have faith in God, and follow those laws with God. And so that's something that Belshazzar should have done in this case, but unfortunately he did not. We keep moving forward. So let's take a look at what the king promised them, right? The king promises them extravagant honors. Number one was a purple clothing. So the purple clothing was, the color purple was worn by royalty in ancient times. As you see to your left, we have some random royal king here that was drawn out. You got Queen Elizabeth coming in next. You got another ancient queen there. And then on your bottom right corner, you got like a nice design with the purple robe. Very nice color, right? So that was the first promise that the king did. So he was going to be known as royalty. The second one was a chain of gold, right? Which is a sign of high social status. So the same gold that was wore as high status was the same false gods that they worship. I don't know about you guys, but in our world today, right, we see a lot of influence online and in our music and our actors and on TV, whatever out there. There's a lot of people who wear these gold and silver and rose gold. Whatever kind of gold that they have. You got 50 Cent with these thick chains on. You got Bad Bunny with these rings and glasses and grills and all these 100% real gold jewelry. That's exactly what the king was offering to Daniel, right? And then the third one, of course, was the position of the third ruler in the kingdom. So you got Lion King to your upper left when Mufasa goes ahead and has Simba. He was promising Simba was going to be the next king for the kingdom of the animal kingdom. The next one you got to your right, you got the ancient African civilization, where you got the king being rose walked by all the servants. You got chess to your lower left, which if the king gets destroyed, the game is over. So the king is the most important piece to hold. And of course, you got Trompito here with the little crown as the president of the United States. So these are just some of the examples that it was the position of the third ruler in the kingdom that was being offered to whoever was going to interpret the dream or the writing. Daniel 5:8-9. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. So typically when the king turns to his wise men, they typically only gave him good news. So now he's scrambling around trying to find what's going on. And his wise men were embarrassed to give him the bad news because all of his servants and his astrologers and Chaldeans and soothsayers, they feared the king. So they didn't want to give him any bad news. They couldn't give it to him. So when we go to Daniel 5:10-11, here comes the queen. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers." Now, in this case, we take a look at kings and prophets again. The queen typically wasn't invited in these kind of feasts and banquets. So we can take a look at how God uses other people in this case, like the queen. The God uses his power through other people to communicate through us. And I'm sure that that's happened in several of our lives where something happens or somebody says something through us and says, you know what, maybe God, that's God talking to me. That's God telling me something. And so God talks through the queen, in this case, talking to King Belshazzar. We'll continue to verse 12. Inasmuch as in excellence, she still continued to say this, knowledge and understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretations. So here pulls up 80-year-old Danny, right? 80-year-old Daniel is coming in. And I just want to say that if the king was as smart as King Nebuchadnezzar, he would have known where to turn to find the meanings of the mysterious writing. Now, we wonder why Belshazzar was ignoring Daniel. In the Bible, there's not really a direct answer, but there's two things that I found from the scriptures of Ellen G. White. Number one, Daniel was 80 years old around this time frame, and the king may have replaced the old leadership with the younger generation, because this is 50 years after King Nebuchadnezzar. And number two, he may have just decided not to commit to Daniel's God, which to me, it just remains striking to me that someone with such a portfolio like Daniel can be easily forgotten. So we'll move forward to chapter, same chapter 13, 16. Then Daniel was brought in before the king, and the king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father, the king, brought from Judah? Have I heard of you? Have the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you?" Now, in these couple verses, I want to say that King Belshazzar is kind of putting Daniel down in a bad level, saying like, "Are you that Daniel from Judah?" Being like a racist almost, saying, you know, "You're that Daniel from Judah. Are you that Daniel from Judah?" And he didn't really care who Daniel was. And so once again, it remains striking. And then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writings to the king and make known to him its interpretation." So all the three promises, the extravagant promises that the king offered, Daniel completely ignored it. And we know that Daniel's priorities were in line because none of that stuff really mattered. It was all materialistic. None of it matters. As long as he was there standing up for God, that's what truly mattered for Daniel. So I'm not gonna read all of this here, but in this case right here, when Daniel comes in, Daniel explains the part of what happened to his grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar. He explains to him how King Nebuchadnezzar was in the 7 years, how they fed him grass like oxen, and his body was wet with dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. He kind of shows King Belshazzar an example of what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar, reminding him, look at what the King Nebuchadnezzar did, and look at now what you're doing. So if we move into 22 and 25, he goes ahead and says, "But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all of this, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, and that the God who holds your breath in his hands and owns all of your ways, you have not glorified." Then the finger of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. So Daniel then indicts the king on 3 counts, right? Number 1, Belshazzar totally ignored his experience of Nebuchadnezzar. Otherwise, he would have repented and humbled himself like his grandfather. Number 2, Belshazzar has used the temple vessels in order to drink wine and praise his idols, mentions in the 6 orders. Excuse me. And number 3, the king has neglected to glorify God, the one who holds your breath, aka you never bite the hand that feeds you, especially God, that owns everything from you, that the reason why we're all living and breathing right now is because of how merciful and loving our God is. And this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. I'll repeat again. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. Now, what does this mean? This is its interpretation of each word. Mene, God has counted your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So as previously discussed, the sages do not dare to say something unpleasant to the king like that. Only Daniel proves capable of decoding the actual message. And not to mention that it's not exactly words of comfort and cheer, especially to the king. But Daniel never feared to state the truth, unlike the king's people. That very night, Belshazzar, king of Chaldeans, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Tragic ending. Belshazzar dies. Not surprised. Now, how does this particular chapter connect to the prophecy in Revelations? A lot of the times I'm sure we've mentioned previously that Daniel, the book of Daniel is very correlated with Revelations. And so I'm going to just point out 3 small verses here. We'll go over to Revelation chapter 14, verse 8. And another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she has made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. We are like living in the world now that is like ancient Babylon. That's exactly what Revelations 14:8 correlates to now. The next one is chapter 16, verse 19. Now the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon was remembered before God to give her cup of wine, the fierceness of his wrath. So in earth right now, as you guys know, we're all divided by nations, by religions, languages, and races. And that's exactly in the world that we live in right now, exactly like Revelation has stated. And Revelation 18:2, and he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Excuse me. The people walking on this earth right now, we're all living in a personal prison. We're all fighting a certain obstacle, a certain challenge, a certain demon, a certain sin that we want to get off our chest, that we want to let go. We're all fighting that right now. And so in what ways, and this is just a question that I'm going to connect to Romans, in what ways do we see the principle expressed in these texts manifested, not just in this story, but also in the world today? I'm going to lead us to Romans chapter 1, verse 21 through 25. Because they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became fertile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like a corruptible man, and birds and 4-footed animals and creeping things. Therefore, God also gave them up to the uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth for God for lie, and worshipped and served creatures rather than the Creator, who was blessed forever. For this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. For even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the women, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. Now, these are some very powerful verses in the Bible, which, the Bible is very clear, and God tells us everything directly to our faces. And this is exactly what Belshazzar was doing with his people in Babylon. And do we see these kind of things in our world today? Absolutely. I mean, I take a look at, some of these. I take a look at some of these statements that come in through 26 and 32, and I take a look at myself and say, you know what, Danny, like, you're all of those. You were all of those. You still are, and we're all born sinners. I'm a sinner. If anything, I take a look at myself in the mirror and feel ashamed of myself because we're exactly all of these things that mentioned in the Bible. And so the final question is, are we like Daniel or are we like King Belshazzar? Who do we want to be in our personal lives? In our world nowadays, we see so much sin, corruption, evil things like Romans just explained to us. And once again, this is something that, it has so much influence on us. I mean, there's a lot of things that we battle on a daily basis. There's a lot of lust. There's the pornography, the homosexuality is such a big influence now in our world that, some of the leaders in the free world here, they praise the homosexuality. They praise the amount of lust. Some of the things that we see on TV, that we see on our social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I mean, all of these things, you wake up in the morning and you just see it like if it's normal. You really do. And to me, I just find it so surprising that, not only does the world have influence, but our friends also have a big influence on us. And it's so hard that sometimes we like to fit in with the world and we allow them to practice that, or we allow it to be okay. Like, it's okay to go ahead and do that stuff, or it's okay to go ahead and continue to do what's wrong in the eyes of the Lord. And to me, it's just very surprising, because it's a big wake up call for myself. When I accepted the offer to do chapter 5, I chose May 2nd, which was today, because I wanted to give myself enough time to prepare, and I completely forgot where Daniel was standing in this time period throughout those 12 chapters. As we see these beautiful stories throughout Daniel, it just hit me studying this sermon to myself, because we're all like these sinners that we see with King Belshazzar. And so one of the things is, are we like Daniel or are we like King Belshazzar? We must stick to God like the faith of Daniel. We must stick to the writings in our Bibles, because that writing in the Bible is for us. It's not for any specific person. All that writing is for us. The Bible, in fact, is our writings for our hearts, for our walls, for our church, for our community, for our nations, for our everything. Every single person in the world needs that Bible. All of those writings in the Bible are for us. And so one of the things is, Daniel stood his ground with God since chapter 1. Since the moment that the king offered Daniel meat, Daniel said, no, I'm all set. I don't eat meat. I don't drink wine. Give me water. Give me vegetables. Give me fruits. I don't need that. Daniel is such a great example in this chapter, because not only did he see all of that influence in Babylon, of how corrupt Babylon was, but Daniel continued to stay faithful throughout those 80 years that he was alive until this chapter, he's about 80 years old. He stood faithful and strong throughout those 80 years. Nothing could touch Daniel. Daniel never folded. Daniel never feared anybody. Daniel didn't fear not one soul. He got stood in front of kings. He got stood in front of people. He prayed outside his window 3 times, 4 times a day. To me, Daniel was such a big role model that I think myself, I'm like, you know what? When we go out there in the real world, we go to church every week. Sometimes we study our Bibles. Sometimes we pray. Sometimes we don't. And then we think we're all good. We think we're fine. We think nothing's going to happen to us. But in fact, anything can happen to us. Even in Psalms chapter 21, we walk the valley of the shadow of death. And we're walking right now in the valley of the shadow of death, meaning anything can happen to us at any given moment. And so if we're not prepared like Daniel was, we can easily be folded like any other person. And I just think it's so important that as Christians, we have to remember that being strong in our faith is the only thing that's going to give us victory throughout all of our challenges. I don't know what you're personally going through in life. I don't know what kind of demons you're facing. I don't know what the enemy is attacking in your life, whether it be your family, something personal within your career, within anything. I don't know what kind of troubles you are, but I will tell you one thing, that at the end of it all, if you have great enough faith like Daniel had in God, nothing can fold you. Nothing can bring you down in this world. Daniel stood so strong and never feared anybody. And in fact, a true fact, the Bible says, do not fear 365 times. How ironic it is that 1 year is 365 days. You can literally wake up in the morning and read, do not fear every single day of the year for the rest of your life, because there's 365 verses with do not fear in them. How crazy is that, right? And so we must never stay comfortable in our lives. And one thing that my father always told me growing up, the enemy never sleeps. The enemy is always there to attack you. You have to be ready. You have to stand firm. And to me, it's just something so important in our lives that we're living, this generation is so full of corruption that I just look outside to the world and I say, wow, God, we've come this far. What can I do to make the world a better place today? What can I do to have a stronger faith, to grow with people, to grow with you? And if we don't read our Bibles, if we don't pray like Daniel did, if we don't have that faith, like I said, we're going to fold. And I think as a church, as Pursuit, as all of our youth, we have to stand strong with the Word of God. The Word of God is so clear to us that any child can understand the same Word of God the same way like the adults do. And it's a true fact. Any child can understand the Word of God just like the parents did. And some of us are growing up, some of us are young, some of us are mid-age. I don't know where you are in your life, but I want us all to be strong in faith, just like Daniel was. And I got a little announcement to bring up to the table. My wife is actually pregnant. She is 12 weeks, and I'm going to be 13 weeks. I'm sorry. And I'm going to be a father. And it's just so eye-opening to me that if we're not prepared and if we're not here to teach our kids, if our kids doesn't see the example of us getting up in the morning and praising God and worshiping God and giving our faith to God, our children are never going to follow what we do. They're never going to follow God. They're never going to have a foundation. And so it's a big eye opener because I'm far from being perfect. I'm nowhere near it. In fact, I'm a big sinner. I have a lot of things to work on myself. And so I just want to say, let us be prepared. Let us be strong, and let us have faith with God like Daniel did. Who are you going to be at the end of every day whenever you wake up? Do you want to be like King Belshazzar, or do you want to be like Daniel is the final question. and I'll just leave that up to you. Now, I have a couple discussion questions that I'd like to open the room with here. Let me just share my screen again here. So discussion question number one. Now, anybody is open to answer these. Belshazzar ignored the true God and praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Which gods today pose a threat to your relationship with the true God? Now, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and talk about what's holding you on a personal basis, or some kind of testimony where, something was holding you from a threat to your relationship with God, that's fine with me. But which gods today pose a threat?
I'll say for me, it can be my relationships with other people. Because sometimes I can get caught up in what my friends think of me, or maybe not even what my friends think of me, but like random people whose opinion I value. And so sometimes I can be challenged in wanting to tailor myself, my actions, my personality to them, because I want to seek their approval rather than remembering that I'm already enough and I already have God's approval.
Yeah. You know what? You bring a very good point, Ariana, because I will tell you, growing up, I just moved to Charlotte, as you guys know, like about a year and a half ago. Growing up in Connecticut, I started off with a lot of youth in my old church. And as the years went by, a lot of them left, unfortunately, but I still stood in close contact with them. And, throughout high school and college, you tend to get these friends out in the world. And like I said, it's a really big influence. And I could remember in my early 20s, I would join my friends, to the club, to the bar. I would be around them drinking and smoking. I mean, I never did anything, but I was around that scene for so long. And then come Sabbath, I was in church. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, how big of an influence, how big of a switch. It's like, I was such a big hypocrite in my life that, I'm out here practicing the same things that King Belshazzar was doing in his feast in Babylon, and we tend to get so comfortable that those toxic traits in other people will influence to us, and we tend to begin with them. We tend to be riding with them, so that's a very good point, Ariana. I appreciate the response on that. Anybody else?
I think that, for example, in the Hispanic community, status is something that's very important.
Oh, yeah.
Like you walk into a room, and let me not even say Hispanic, because I've noticed that in my relationships here, like when you go to a group of people that you've never met before, the first thing that they ask is, what do you do? And I feel like we've placed a lot of importance in the status and what you do and the importance of that makes you who you are. And we forget that our value and who we are is already placed on us by God. And I feel like we limit ourselves to a lot of the things that God has called us to do because we have this limiting belief that we're not enough, because I don't have a title, because I didn't get an education, or because I'm not what my parents expect of me or my church expects of me. And it's like being at peace with who God has made you to be, of course, with wanting to always become better, because like you said, now with being a dad, having new responsibilities, of course you want to be like the best version of yourself, but being the best version of yourself is not like an arrival point. You're always going to be working towards that. And it's like just knowing that sometimes we can put so many things ahead of our relationship of God when with God, because for some reason something has gotten in the way. Is sad, because now that we've been stripped away of everything with the quarantine and everything, it has put a lot of things in perspective. It's like, what is truly important? And I've been almost praying, hey God, I want you to come back, because I am so caught up with all the things that I've lost sight. And it's like, now I'm scared because I'm not ready, but that's because I haven't been preparing all this time. So
Absolutely great point, Gillian. I appreciate that. You make a very good point about status. And you're right. It's just not in the Hispanic community. I mean, you see a lot of it in Hispanics. I've had tons of of friends that tell me like, oh yeah, the first question that the parents say is, what does he do for a living? Or what do you do for a career? What do you do for a job? And to me, that's status is so influential nowadays that if you're not making almost six figures nowadays, it's like you're a nobody. Or if you don't have this car, or if you don't have this style, or if you don't have any of these kind of things, you're not high on status, you know? And I just want to make it very clear that God doesn't care about any of that stuff. Remember, when God comes, we're not taking nothing with us. Absolutely nothing. The only thing we're taking is our heart. And so you make such a good point, Gillian, because people think that you got to have such a great career, you got to go to education, you got to go to college, you got to do something in order for you to be somebody. No, you don't. The only thing that you have to do to be a somebody is have faith in God and continue to praise him. And that's what's gonna open everybody else's eyes. Because when you talk to somebody, it's not about what they do, it's about who you are. And unfortunately, we do live in a world that's like that. And it's so sad to see that, because people will judge you not for who you are, but for what you do. And it's a sad world that we live in, unfortunately. But keep your head up, Gillian. And great point that you say that, have that faith in God, and your faith is going to stand out than anything else that you have in this life. I'll go to the next question, the last one here to wrap up. Discussion question number 2 is, Daniel indicts the king for not glorifying the God who holds your breath in his hands and owns all your ways. How meaningful is this depiction of God for you? And how do you feel about such a God? How do you feel about God is the question. I'll go ahead and get started. Number 1, since I was grown in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, my parents raised me up with a lot of love, especially in the house, but it was tough love. Tough love is the best love, by the way. Can't be frail nowadays in this world. And to be honest, God is a jealous God. And in fact, there's so much love that comes from God that, to me, it's almost like love and fear is one thing, except instead of me fearing God as in some kind of a scary way, even though sometimes we do fear God in a scared way, because there's times where we stand in our life and say, you know what, God, I'm scared of what you're about to bring me in life because I'm not right now. And then there's other times where a fear can mean a form of respect. And I feel like how do I feel about such a God is that he has such a big, merciful and loving heart that he gives us to us every day. The only thing that keeps me going on a daily basis is the love of God, because if I didn't have that, there would be no Danny. There would be no heart in me. There would be no mind. There would be no soul. And so to me, I think love is one of the biggest things, because as I stated, love is God and God is love. Any other takers on this question?
I feel like for a fact, we should value God's depiction of us more than anybody else's. Earlier in the first question, there was someone else who spoke about the image we present to other people in order to be accepted. But we should wake up every day knowing that the way God sees us should be the only way that matters to the world, right? Like we shouldn't want to please society or the community in their norms or in their own perspective. Like with the trends, there's so many trends nowadays, and all social media or in real life, regardless, the trends that could possibly take us away from God, challenges that could hurt our body, but like it makes people cool in certain ways. It brings fame to these people, and that's what they value. They value the perspective of others upon themselves instead of actually valuing the only thing that matters, right? Like these people didn't die on the cross. They didn't die to forgive their sins. The fans didn't do anything to these famous people, yet Jesus gave his life for us, and we some of us continue to care about how others portray us instead of, wanting to be right in God's eyes 24/7.
You know what, Bobby? Couldn't have said it any better. For anybody, that's the baby brother Bobby right there, speaking some good facts. And so it's the sad truth, like I said. And now that we're so glued onto our phones, sometimes I wish we never had cell phones, because it's such a big idol that we spend hours and hours on it to see these people, like Bobby said, to praise these people that don't do nothing, that don't care about any of us, And here we have God that holds our breath, and we can't even sit down at the table and do our Sabbath school lesson and read the Bible. And you know what? I'll be the first one to raise my hand, because some of the things that take me away from that is number one, my career. I go to work, I'm at work 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And then after work, all I want to do is go to the gym or go outside. Instead of me waking up in the morning and doing my Sabbath school lesson with my wife, we tend to forget about these things and get so distracted. If there's anything more else in this world, there's a massive amount of distractions that will take you away from valuing your time with God. And once your value time with God is taken away, your faith starts to slowly decrease, And I take a look at, same way that I have a marriage with Alejandra, same way that we have girlfriends and boyfriends, wives and husbands, the same amount of effort and time that we put into our relationship and marriages is the same way that we have to look at it with God. If we're not right with God, we're not right with ourselves. And to be honest, I get sick to my stomach at times when I didn't give enough time to God. I just feel sick. I feel hungry. I feel hungry because some of the things that happens to me in my, or the demons that I'm fighting, or the challenges on a daily basis, it's almost like, wow, God, you know what? You saved me from this today, and I owe you a big one. And so it's a good point that you made there, Bobby. I appreciate that. Any other takers? Oh, sorry, go for it.
Sometimes it's very confusing, because I feel like our relationship with God is largely based on fear. And that's not just because of us doing wrong things and thinking that God is going to strike us down. But since little children, I remember being at church and being told, if you keep on talking, God is going to punish you. So we've been brought up with this thought that God is vindictive. And yes, I think that God is a just God. So sometimes when he needs to fight for us, and when he needs to wage war on sometimes the world for sin, he does seem vindictive, but the God that we serve is a God of love. So I feel that true love is without fear. And a lot of times the reason that we fear him is because we know that we continually do what we're not supposed to do.
Exactly.
So we fear that we're going to get punished for the things that we are not doing or doing wrong. And we need to remember that God is not there just to strike you down. He actually wants you to improve and be better. And just like the thought that he loves you more than your ability to even love yourself helps me remember that, okay, so I messed up, but he is going to forgive me. And as long as I really repent, he's going to want to transform me and save me. So I have to remind myself that the fear that we feel is not only based on how we've been brought up, but also on the fact that the devil wants you to believe that the God you serve is a God that wants to destroy you. Exactly. Because he wants to destroy you.
Exactly.
And if you allocate that feeling to God, then you don't want to serve a God that is going to punish you all the time. So it's like, right. God really loves us.
Absolutely right. Wow. You couldn't have said that better, Dillian. A great key point there. And as we read in Romans, like those people of Babylon, they took an uncorruptible God and made it into an image of a corruptible God. And even nowadays, I've seen on social media, if you're a Christian, it's almost like you're a bad guy now. It's almost like you're considered a bad guy now, and you have to show your true colors. because nobody's perfect in this world, number one. And number two, the most important thing that will stick out is your faith. You know, if you stay true to yourself, if you state the truth about what you know about God, people are going to see you so differently. And they're going to say, you know what? This person is a humble servant of God, you know? So great point, Gillian. Thank you. Any other takers? All right, folks. I just want to say thank you so much. I see the chat with a lot of congrats and yays. We're super excited and looking forward towards this. You know, we didn't plan it, but God has a reason for everything that happens in our lives, and I just want to say thank you now for having me have this chapter. I'm looking forward to the rest of them, and I truly give you guys a blessed, happy Sabbath, and send out love for everyone out there, and to stay safe throughout these tough times. But do not fear anything, regardless of what kind of virus, disease, what kind of anything. First moment that you fear something is when you give up. Just remember that. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ariana now.
Thanks, Danny, so much for bringing that powerful word. And I have one last song for you guys. It's called Clean. And, you know, just listening to everyone talking, thinking about how we all struggle with different battles, different sins, things that we struggle with, but our uniting factors that we have all been chosen, we have all been forgiven, we've been redeemed, we've been sanctified, and when Christ died on that cross, his blood paid not just for some people, it paid for everyone, paid for you and me. And so as we sing this song, I just want you guys to know that, yeah, we might be struggling with certain things, but we've already been redeemed. The battle's already been won, and it's a free gift, and all that we have to do is accept it. So this
Amen.
is Clean. Precious blood has left me forgiven, pure like the whitest of snow, powerful to make sin and shame retreat. His covenant is making me whole, so I will rise and lift my head. For by his mercy my life was spared. The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. Purify my heart in your presence. Teach me to discover the joy of holiness that forms as you draw me close. In you, what was lost is restored. So I will rise and lift my head. By his mercy, my life was spared. The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. So I will rise and lift my head. By his mercy, my life was spared. The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Danny, I knew you were a celery juice king, a gym rat. Now you're a preacher. Your love of Jesus is super inspiring and you're super passionate about what you believe in. And thank you for being such a great friend and for sharing the word with us today. Thank you, Ariana, for your beautiful voice and blessing us with amazing songs. And hopefully by May 16, we may be able to see each other again in person, or we may be live streaming from the church. So let's pray that we can see each other sooner than later. And just thank you so much for joining us and tune in next week. Hope you guys have a good rest of your Sabbath.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, everyone.
Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.